House. Thank you.
Kia ora. I call Catherine Delahunty.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. He mihi nui ki te whare paramata ko tēnei rā. Also, I'd like to start my contribution by acknowledging the Clerk of the House for her wonderful work over many years and her dignity and mana appropriately during this particular extended treaty sitting. Dignity and mana is not exclusive to anyone, but it's always magnificent when it's seen. So kia ora to you, Mary. The Green Party supporting the bill, it's essential that we do because we supported the settlement bills which it came out of. Therefore, we have to acknowledge that these settlement bills created this particular bill. I sat on the Select Committee. I found it extremely interesting, but actually I found it quite complex. I don't think it was as simple as some of the speakers have implied. Certainly the support from the 10 participants on the committee, the 10 iwi that are hapu that are represented, was very clear, but there were some interesting debates and there were some interesting submissions which when I read the detail of the bill and the functions of this committee, I do want to touch upon. So while supporting the effort that was made and the flow on from the settlement process which has created this, I do think this is one of the weaker regional planning committees in terms of co-governance that I've ever seen. Because if you read the bill, there is no reference to co-governance. There is no reference to decision-making power. And if you look at 10 functions and powers of this committee, which already exist, and I've been reading their minutes, its functions and powers are to consider the RMA documents and recommend to the Council. So this is not comparable, Mr Speaker, with Waikato Tainui or Maniapoto and co-governance. We actually need to be upfront and say, these are not words we can just float around and play with. Co-governance is not Article 2, and co-management and co-governance are not reflected through recommendation but through shared power. And this is not a decolonising piece of legislation. Laudable as it is that we give statutory recognition, and it is important to do that for an existing committee, we actually need to talk about what co-governance is. And Ngahiwi Tomoana's submission on behalf of Ngāti Kahungunu, while they ended up supporting the procedure of this bill and their relationships locally, which are not the business in the sense of this House, but the business of Ngāti Kahungunu me iwi katoa o te rohi, actually raised some really interesting points about this. Ngāti Kahungunu raised some concerns that true partnership frameworks reflecting tangata whenua's kaitiaki are not the same as just having the ability to recommend on natural resources. And to quote the letter they wrote to the Select Committee, Ngāti Kahungunu is concerned that the opportunity of the best and most meaningful, sustainable and robust co-governance and/or co-management relationship arrangement will be missed and left with and tangata whenua will be left with something weaker than what other iwi and other people have in the region, including Ngāti Kahununu's relationship with the Greater Wellington Regional Council. So he says, how is this different than a glamorised Māori Advisory Committee? And I mean, painful as that question is, I think that it's a fair question to ask when you look at the statutory powers that are there. Regional planning committees are important, but not if they have no real power. And I think when we look at the issues in the Rohi around water, which is one of the hot topics on the Regional Planning Committee, it was Ngāti Kahungunu who had to take the Regional Council to court for their failure to sustain the aquifers future. So an existing committee has now been confirmed through legislation, but that existing committee was unable to do exactly what is required in terms of Kaitiakitanga Section 6 of the RMA. So it does make the point that Ngāti Kahungunu are already worried that they have to use an instrument, an expensive instrument like the Environment Court, rather than being able to resolve these things through the Regional Planning Committee. So, I mean, much as I support the bill in terms of the aspirations of iwi and hapu katoa across the Rohi and the need to fulfil the agreements in the settlement, I have to raise these issues in terms of those 2 points. What is co-governance? It's not a woolly fantasy term where we just say, we'll put some people on a committee and that's co-governance. That is not robust co-governance. And it's not meeting the needs and abilities of people to be kaitiaki if they had to then take the regional council, the very body that they've now got this committee with and have had for some time, to court over issues to do with water. Now, water is a central issue in this field. And if you look at Ruataniwha, or the dodgy dam as we call it, and if you look at the stresses on the aquifer, not to mention the nitrate issues in the rivers, if you look at Tukituki and the other awa in the Rohi, it's a huge challenge that faces the whole region and ideally faces it collectively. But the concern of the Greens remains that in this bill, the functions and powers of the Regional Planning Committee is to implement a work program for the review of RMA documents. Now, having spent, maybe 20 years of my life on RMA issues, it does really concern me that there is no power to do more than recommend when water is at a crisis point, when supposedly no one owns water, but that is allowing a water bottling company to export it out of the aquifer in the Rohi. And also, it does concern me that at the bigger picture level, we should play with terms like co-management and co-governance and te tiriti o Waitangi without being clear. Now, maybe, and I'm not from the area and I don't like to hazard a guess, maybe it's because the Pākehā community, and I've received a few emails from them, don't understand. That would not be a first. They don't understand, and therefore tangata whenua once again have generously allowed what they might hope to be a first step towards a transition towards Article 2. But the problem is you don't get that many shots in legislation, and this is their shot, and I can see why Ngāhiwi Tomoana and Ngāti Kahanunu Inc. raised the concern, not to oppose it, but to say, is this a glamorised Māori Advisory Committee? We would like to see this bill be stiffened in its strength, be more explicit in its acknowledgements and more directive to the Hawke's Bay Regional Council that they actually need to accept the recommendations of a committee rather than have the option of not accepting them. Because this is about all the planning instruments that will affect all the resources, not just water, but all the resources which Te Treaty guarantees very strongly in terms of the rangatiratanga of iwi katoa, to be something that can only be recommended about. So I'm glad to see that that the people of the Rohi want the bill to go forward and that no one has come back to us at the Select Committee and said don't support the bill, and no one, the Greens were approached earlier on not to, but that position has changed. I'm glad to be able to say we have not heard that, but at the second reading stage, I am saying, is this the best we can do in terms of the functions and powers of this? Are we actually handing this community a real understanding of change, a real direction in terms of Article 2, a real co-governance, or are we actually setting this up for yet again a disappointment for the 10 hapu and iwi involved, or the 9, that they will be at the table? Thank you very much. We really appreciate that you've travelled through the Rohi to come to this meeting, but we've decided not to take any notice of what you've said because other vested interests in the community are just as important to us, and therefore you're not going to get your ability to exercise Section 6, Section 7, Section 8 of the RMA. So I would love to be proved wrong, but when the legislation is as weak as this, Mr. Speaker, I'm not quite sure that we're going to be proved wrong. And it's disappointing because I recognise the work that everybody has got put into this, that the Select Committee's put into this. It's an important bill, but the Greens will not muck around. We're not interested in recommendations as a substitute for Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And when we look at the other bills that other iwi have negotiated through this Parliament, and they have explicit co-governance, and co-governance is already a compromise, our doubts remain. But more of this to come at the third reading. Kia ora tātou katoa.
Mr. Speaker, Peter Paraoni.